Hi, I am Madeline Irene,
Hi, I'm Chloe Osburn, and
and
this
this
is
is
Pretty
Pretty
Graphic
Graphic
Podcast.
Podcast. So, normally we will talk about, honestly, kind of whatever we want to talk about.
Yeah,
My first case that I'm bringing here, it is a murder case, but
yes.
whenever we drop, I think it'll be various different stuff.
Yes, it
Uh,
definitely will because we know that this is heavy stuff to talk about first, like, episode, and we don't want it all to feel like that.
Well, that, and we have various different interests as well. I chose
Yes.
this case because it's one that I've been aware of for a while, and I feel like people don't really know about or talk about too much. Um, but we also have a lot of different interests, so I would definitely keep an eye out for any upcoming
Yes, we will
projects.
let you know on our socials what the next episode will be kind of themed around. So just be watching for
Keep an eye out.
that.
um, so the case that I'm talking about today, this is the Houston mass murders. Obviously, this happened in Texas. It's not really talked about because this kind of took 1973. This case, that's kind of when the culmination happened, where everything kind of came to an end. Everything kind of got aired out. Nope, that doesn't make sense. The laundry was put in the wind.
It was set out to dry.
It was, yeah, people were seeing it. Um, but this story, it kind of centers around this character called Dean Coral, uh, which, um, I
Yeah,
hate
him.
to put like a huge focus on the killers. That's definitely, whenever I did my research in this case, it was very much from a perspective of the people that were affected by it and the you know families that
Right, centered more around the victim than the person that committed this
the
crime.
crime.
Yeah.
um which, and I mean, there were bodies that were being identified up until 2011. There's still a body that has not been identified and is sitting in the morgue.
Since 2011?
Yeah, they had some bodies that were identified and like linked with families finally in 2011. But like I said, there is still one body that is not identified. um so, these are families that have been waiting that long for
Right.
an answer, that have been writing to the state that long for an answer.
Definitely.
Just wondering, if if this could have happened to their child. And it is a super, super morbid case. It is horrible. And I would say it was a case that was very preventable. But for whatever reason, the police just kind of didn't piece it together at the most imperative time, when they should have, especially considering that this could have continued for a way longer period of time.
Right, and this isn't anything new for police departments in general.
Oh yeah. Well, and that, was kind of the thing that was a major theme about the police department, was that the unit for missing kids was already a small unit, and putting, this load of children on top of all of the other work that they already had, like, a lot of them, most of the time, if they could find any kind of family issue, whether it was as small as like they're arguing about the length of hair, and like, because
Right.
this was, when this case took place, it was 1970.
Hmm.
So that's obviously in the middle of that, like, free love movement and like long hair and a
Right,
hippie.
yeah.
And so,
Cut your damn hair.
yeah, exactly. And so if they're, things as small as that, police would kind of see that and be like, okay, well, there was issues in the home, so maybe this
Right,
kid was a
yeah.
runaway, and I don't want to waste our financial resources on this. And yeah,
Yeah,
it's sad to see.
it is so sad to see the uneven workload that is in a lot of just different departments in the justice system in general. Uh, but for this case in particular.
Well, that, and I mean, I feel like on this case specifically, like it took an extra big kind of like what the fuck in a lot of cases because of the parents being, just, they know either which, and like we'll go through this, and I really, I do want to, because there is some information that I have about like specific victims and their families and kind of how this affected them and what they did, you know, after, their child disappears, what
Right.
would you do? Um, yeah, but there was like one case, there was a case where a mother said, like my child ran away. Like nobody runs away wearing swim trunks and only wearing swim trunks
Right.
and all they have is 80 cents on them.
Right.
You
Usually you're
know,
gonna put like clothes on, take some money with you probably.
maybe pack a bag, maybe pack a bag.
Extra
Like
pair of socks
it
for the
didn't make
road.
sense. There was another one of them, which I'll probably reiterate this fact later whenever I get to it. Um, but they were going on vacation like the very next day after this kid was like taken,
Oh.
and his bags were all packed, and he even had like $20 on his nightstand ready to go. And like his parents were like, if if he was gonna run away, why wouldn't you take those things? Why would you
Right.
not take those things? Um, and it's just it's sad in that way because it's like how would you feel as a parent, like knowing full well that like if my child ran away, this is something he would take,
Right. Yeah.
and the police just being like
Womp womp.
he doesn't matter that much. And when they did that, when they labeled him as a runaway, they basically were like, we're not doing a full blown search for your child. Like, it's not an official search. But if we see your child out and about during the day, like, we'll stop them and we'll question them. And we'll tell them, like, you need to go home.
Your
But
parents are looking for you.
yeah, yeah, but they're not doing anything. And it's only during school hours, by the way, too, which I thought was just like, I was like, question mark? Why not? Like,
What
if you
about the
saw a
rest
child
of the
at
day?
midnight, you wouldn't
Yeah.
be like, hey, what are you doing
It's a little weird.
out here at midnight? You would just be like, oh, child
Unaccompanied.
in the street. Oh God, child in the street. I can word. Uh,
They're in
but
the streets now.
yeah, no, for real. Oh man. Um. So Dean Corll was born December  24th, 1932, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, to Mary Emma Robinson and Arnold Edwin Corll. Um. They had a very tumultuous relationship, I would say at best.
Ooh.
Um, they ended up divorcing in 1946, which 4 years earlier to that, they did have another child besides Dean. So he did have a younger brother. Um, but yeah, no, 4 years later, they decided to cut that cord and call it good. Which at that same time, Arnold ended up being enlisted into the army. So basically, Mary retained custody of the children. Arnold went away to the army, and they did not, I'm pretty sure, kind of reconnect until 1950. And that is when Mary and Arnold once again tried to uh, do a marriage. And
Well,
yeah,
try it again.
let's see how this does. The
Round two will be
Yeah,
so much better.
it always works out. Um, and yeah, they ended up divorcing again. Not too long later. It was 1953. They stuck it out for like,
They did their best.
they let it go. They did
They
it.
really
They did
tried.
that thing. Um, but basically this time she was done. Mary was over it. She was over Arnold. She did retain custody of the children, and she basically remarried a salesman, a clock salesman named Jack West.
Ooh.
And he picked up that family and he said, let's go to Vidor, Texas. And that is where they started living their life.
Wow. Moving from Indiana to Texas is wild.
Oh no, I know. I know. Well, and yeah, she really traveling salesman. Just
Traveling clock
party
salesman.
even better. You know what I'm
Really
saying?
Gets
It's
them gears going.
it's a party. It's a party. Get them gears going, as you would say. So, um, during that time, they did have another sibling. They ended up having another child. Jack and Mary did. So this would be Dean Corll's younger sister. They all kind of lived in the house there while living in Vidor. Jake, the stepdad to Dean Corll, decides that he wants to make his own candy company. Basically, with the way that he travels and sells, he's like, why not make my own candy, sell that on the way too, and then that's just like a double profit for me.
Clocks to candy.
Clocks to candy, it is. It's a gateway. So, um, that's what they did. They dedicated their whole time to it, and basically, it started out in the garage of the family home in Vidor, Texas. And I hope I'm saying that correctly. But that's fine, if I'm not.
We're from
Sometimes
Missouri.
I am. I'm from Missouri. I try. I trying. But that is where he spent most of his time as a teenager, basically dedicating his time like night and day to just working and packaging and getting candy ready for sales. Which I will just mention here that they did get most of their sales in Houston. That's kind of the way that he would travel out when he was selling the clocks. That is typically where they kind of got most of their sales coming in at. Um, in 1958, right after Dean graduated high school, the family decided to actually uproot and move to the outskirts of Houston. So
Okay.
even closer.
Wow.
Yeah. Which just it all seems like super lame. And they decided to move to the outskirts of Houston. They still continue their same operation of the candy company. They're selling candy, 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 all the time. And then 1960 rolls around. Dean's mom is like, "Hey, why don't you go to Indiana for a little while?" His grandmother, um, her husband had just died, so she was recently widowed. And so he does. He goes to Indiana and he hangs out for a while, 2 years to be exact. And while there, he does make friends with a lady there. And he
Lady
gets like
friend.
a lady friend, and he gets like really close with her. And she even proposes to him.
Wow.
uh,
She proposed to him.
yeah, yeah. No, she
Boss
proposes to
moves.
him. I tell ya. And he says no. He says not gonna do that.
Loser.
Um, so that was that. And then 1962 rolls around. It's been 2 years down there. He was kind of over that. And he decides to come back to Houston. To find that basically the candy shop had moved once again to Houston Heights. But like a little bit after, I'm assuming his time back there in 1963, Mary has had just her luck with love, not feeling Jake anymore. They're not getting along anymore. She's over him and she decides to divorce him, also deciding to create her own rival candy company.
Oh.
Yes, that she names Coral Candy Company.
Word.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she's doing what she wants. She's tired.
Big moves out here.
For
in the
real.
Candy company.
For real. Yeah, well, and I'm pretty sure Jake West, his candy company was called Praline King, because that was like his like top selling candy. It was something to do with like a praline.
Huh.
So I don't know. I mean, I
What
think
is a praline?
it's one of those nuts. I'm pretty sure. But I'm sure it's like a sweet nut kind of candy.
Huh. Okay.
I'm not sure. But I mean, I would say Coral Candy Company kind of sounds a little bit more.
It's a little easier to say.
I mean, I just think it's like smoother. You know?
Definitely.
Praline King.
Yes.
Praline.
Pr-
I'm gonna get fucking butchered if I'm not saying this shit right. I'm telling you, it's gonna be funny, but I'll take it.
Be all right.
I'll take it.
It'll be okay.
But yeah, she named Dean the vice president of this Coral Candy Company, and then his younger brother was named the secretary treasurer. because family-owned businesses are the best businesses. Um,
Absolutely.
in that same year, a male teenage employee that was hired at the Coral Candy Company came up to Mary, which was Dean's mom,
Uh-huh.
and was like, "Hey, Dean has been making sexual advances at me, and you know that's not fucking
Wild.
appropriate." I'm assuming that's what I would want to say. It was at that point, I mean, it's 1960, so I'm sure he has better manners than me, but
That's not cool.
oh no, I know. Yeah, no, that's yeah, but he was saying something, which like good for him in that, way,
Right, because it's very hard for victims to come forward and say something to
let
anybody.
alone men. Like I
Yes,
mean, boys, it is
especially, yeah.
so like yeah, there's so many that don't come forward just because of
Exactly.
that like stigma and shame. So I mean good on him for coming forward, but Mary of course does what a horrible person would do, and instead of even confronting her son at all, instead of talking instead of talking to Dean at all about like, hey, did you do anything, like what was this about, anything, she just fires the boy like right there on the
No
spot.
fucking way, dude.
Yeah, was immediately like, you're lying, like just
Ugh,
didn't even do it.
Mary.
uh so sad, so sad to see you're raising a monster.
What
No,
have
it
you
is, it's really gross,
done?
and it's sad, and he's disgusting.
Terrible. Terrible
uh
person.
yeah, but 1964, Dean Coral is drafted into the United States Army. It is time for him to put some time in. uh It is said that he absolutely hated his time in the army. He was not a fan. Uh,
I don't think very many people do enjoy their time in the army. I think it's probably an awful experience for most everybody that
well,
joins.
and that's like, I know, yeah, any story I've heard of people who, even, I mean, not even being, like deployed somewhere different, like just even going through the training and stuff, people, the stories that they have told me,
Yeah, boot
like,
camp stories
I'm
are
just not.
wild.
It's yeah, it's not always a fun one, but of course, Dean Coral is very very smart, and he applies for a hardship discharge, and he ends up getting granted an honorable discharge from the army in 1965.
For why? Why did he apply for
Because
that?
basically he said, he was like, like, I am the vice president of my mom's candy company. She can't run it without me, and I am needed at home. Like, I have to go home. I have to go home. I have to
Army's
help
like,
her.
I'm dropping out of the army to go run my candy store.
It's a candy store. The
I'm
army
needed.
understands. Uh, well, I guess they did, because they granted him
They
one.
did give
Well,
it to
and
him.
the wilder part is like, I'm like, okay, well, he got, he got drafted in 1964, so he went in 1964, and he gets discharged in 1965. You're like, okay, well, he spent, at least a year in there.
Hmm.
But like, when I looked at the months on this, like the date that he was actually drafted in and the date that he left the army, not even a year, not even a full year. He did not do a full year in the army. He went to like a couple different camps, and then he learned something, I think, about radios. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. I should have looked harder at that part, but um yeah, he wasn't into it. He wasn't into it, and he got out pretty quick and pretty easy.
Not an army guy, for sure.
He was not. He was not. But it is also said that whenever he got home and he was around some of his like close acquaintances, he let them know that the army was the first time that he had realized he was a homosexual, and that it was the first time that he had had homosexual experiences.
Wow.
Which I totally think it is complete banana splits. Just like, not even truth at all, that that was the first time he realized he was a
Well,
homosexual.
obviously not if that shop boy is telling his mom he's
like
being
making
sexually
sexual
aggressive towards
advances.
me. Yeah.
Like that cannot be the first time you realized you were homosexual, but I do believe that might have been the first time that he had homosexual like experiences and actually,
With
you know,
somebody consenting, probably.
yeah. I mean, hopefully. Let's
Hopefully,
hope.
we can
Let's
hope.
hope. Um but yeah, 1965 was also the year that the Coral Candy Company decided to uproot and move right across from the Helms Elementary School on 22nd Street. Um,
Not the elementary school.
yes, right outside of the elementary school. And it is so disappointing, I think, whenever I started reading about it, because it's just like, I feel like it's too obvious, like what he did and how he did it.
Right. You essentially offered them up to him on a silver platter,
Oh, yeah.
putting that candy shop right across the street from a school.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and especially, I mean, and that's, I mean, I really look at them, his mom a lot because, like, she chose that location and she knew, like, he had that complaint against him already, and like she
Right.
knew, and then she's actively watching him as he stands outside of the candy company and he's holding candy and handing it out for free to the children as they leave school, predominantly like teenage boys and, you know, preteen boys, and like you're watching him be the way that that child said that he was, and you're actively just like, that's
Eh,
not my son.
I don't.
I don't
Suddenly
see that.
blind.
Oh God, yeah. No.
Just
No.
awful.
No, it's horrible. Well, and then it's also like, how does nobody in the neighborhood notice that? How do you not notice the man? Because it was also said that he was like super friendly with the kids. And this is also the time when the kids like nicknamed him and he gained the nickname Candyman. And he also he gained the nickname Pied Piper. Mainly
Oh,
I've seen the nickname Candyman.
right.
Um,
Yeah. The most fitting, of course.
I feel like, yeah, with
Yeah.
him being all on that candy. Uh, but he was, you know, said to be seen being flirty with his employees and his associates. And, you know, yeah, no, he was being flirty with the employees. And then he installed a pool table in the back area of the Coral Candy Company, and that's basically, I mean, like a place for the employees to hang out, but also, you know, there's like elementary students back there, and he's hanging out with kids and like literal children.
Just weird, weird vibes.
So weird. So weird. So weird on so many levels, and it's just not it. Well, yes, and why? And how did nobody.
Nobody thought this is a little off. All these kids are hanging out in this one place.
Well, right. Well, and with this man, and well, in one of the stories with one of the kids, their mom, he had come by the candy shop whenever he was a young kid, and he had spent so much time at the candy shop that that night his mom had to go to the candy shop to go get him because he
Right.
like would not leave the candy shop, like he was just having so much fun there. Um, and like later on he ends up being this victim of David Coral, and like this whole time, and I feel like that's one of the patterns that um that's just super disturbing, is like a lot of these kids he'd been scoping out for years,
Right.
you know, and was like waiting. And I just uh not one parent,
Something
not one.
is fishy.
Well, that, and then the police. What about the police? Why
Where
not? Where
is
was one
everybody?
officer? One officer being like, "Hey, this is a little fucking weird, right?
Right,
Like a
like
little weird."
little head scratch moment. Where is everybody? The parents are non-existent at this point.
Well, and I mean, it's like I'm kind of at a crossroads with it because I do get that, like, okay, it's 1960 something. There's
Right.
not, you know, like all these serial killers yet. Like, it's just not in your mind to think the worst. But like, what? you
Oh,
know?
for real.
Like, this is just, it's weird. David Owen Brooks kind of enters the scene, which David in this photo obviously is a very old man. This was the like most recent photo of him. He did recently die in 2020 of COVID in prison for these crimes.
Deserved.
Yep. Um, very much so. Um, even noticing like, and this is kind of the really twisted part of the case, and I think the piece that like nobody expects. Because I mean, typically when you expect a monster, like you expect, you expect a monster. You expect somebody who's like a weirdo.
Right. You expect
And
them to be rough looking. Like, you expect them to look like somebody that would be bad.
yeah, yeah. Well, and that's in this case. That's why it was just so wild because of our buddy here, David Owen Brooks, and we'll out about later, Elmer Wayne Henley. Um, yeah, so David, he was only 12 years old when he entered the scene, hanging out at Dean's, Coral Candy Company in the back with the pool table. And he was hanging out, with all the other kids back there too, just fitting in with them. Which, as much as this is, a full grown man right here that you're seeing, who was a lot older when he was young, he was said to be very kind of small. Um, and, he wore big glasses. And his parents, he came from a divorced home as well. So his mom wasn't really around. He lived with his dad, and his dad was a very, kind of man's man. In 1960, I think that definitely meant something,
Hmm.
um as far as being tough. And uh I think he always felt, most likely, and I'm just saying, I'm not saying I know for sure or anything like that, but I would assume I would kind of feel, just like a little bit like the person that I love doesn't, they don't approve of me, or they don't see me as enough.
Right, yeah.
And that is kind of a reason that Dean became so enamored with Dean Coral, which just happened in about 1967. So we're a few years, after the army there. They meet, and, you know, David was quoted as kind of saying, like, Dean was the first man, the first adult male in his life that didn't laugh at him, didn't make jokes about him, didn't, you know, demean him straight to his face.
Aw.
And he Dean was nice to him like that. Like, Dean listened to him and talked to him and treated him like a person. And not only did Dean Coral do that for David, but whenever David needed money or whenever David needed, Dean was right there with it in his hands. And I mean, that just kind of really sucked David in at that young age. I mean, 12 years old, 13 years old, it's super formative years. Um,
Right. So it's almost like Dean was making it to where almost David would have to be dependent on him
yeah.
for certain things because he could just get it for him.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, he felt comfortable asking Dean for it, and he didn't want to talk to his dad. He didn't want to be around his dad, and like he had to though, because that's who he lived with was his dad. And even though they didn't, necessarily get along, I'm assuming, by the way, as well. I haven't read too much. There was like a little bit about David Brooks' life and a little bit about Ernest Wayne Henley's, but most of their like biography stuff was based around kind of the situation that happened with Dean Coral.
Right.
So I've got what I've got. But I would assume, that David Owen Brooks and his dad really kind of had that rift in their relationship. That was a perfect rift for a predator like Dean Coral to kind of step in and really exploit.
Right.
Um, he did, and that was the problem with David's father the most, is that David's father just kind of let it happen. he let his son hang out with this predator. He let him be around him. You know, he didn't really question it. A full grown man, a full grown, I
Hanging out with
mean,
a child.
hanging out with a 12-year-old child
Like
that he's
that's
not related to. He
weird.
has nothing. Why? Why is this man
Right.
not married?
Even
Why does he not
for
have a
back
family
in
of
the
his
day,
own?
like that's weird.
It's
It's weird
strange.
to be hanging out with a child as an adult.
It is. It is. It is strange. It is strange. Which, and I will say during these, well, and I mean, yeah, we'll wait on that one until we get a little further down.
Okay.
But, uh, you know, Dean was doing all kinds of things that were wildly inappropriate to me.
Uh-huh.
Like he was taking boys, he would take like groups of boys and they would go to the beach and they would have picnics at the beach. And that was, something that David would be a part of as well. He would go to the beach and he would hang out with everybody down there and go swim and I guess eat and whatever.
Oh, jeez.
But, and I mean, to me, knowing what we're about to find out, this is just prime time for other things to have absolutely happened. And also, if Dean Coral was comfortable doing this, the times that he did do it with David, how many times was he doing it in situations without David? And, is there a likelihood that Dean Coral could be linked to a mass amount of, other bodies?
Right, yeah.
And other missing children. That's and I mean that's mainly why this case is also one of the bigger parts of my noggin, because just the lack of looking into that happened and the amount of families that are sitting there and they're wondering. And like I said, I mean, some of these people, there's still a body sitting in the morgue that has
Right.
been found and not identified. Some of the bodies they waited, I mean, they had to wait until 2011 before they had the technology to figure out the identities of these people. There are brothers and sisters of victims and family members that have been waiting since 1973 for an answer.
Right, which is wild to me because like that child didn't belong to anybody. There nobody was looking for them, and even with the advancements in technology, like you'd think that they would be able to find something with like genealogy, DNA samples, like anything. Wild.
Well, and it's I mean, it's hard on them because there are so many people who write in every single day to like the State Department and they're like, "Hey, is my this person, related to this case? They might be related to this, da 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 da, and then it's basically figuring out who the family is and getting the samples and being able to test them, which is a process in itself,
Right.
but I think what haunts me the most is thinking that like there might be a family who sat there for all these years thinking, like my kid ran away because they hated me or because I was too much or because I made a mistake. And, you know, that's not the case. Like
Right. The
your kid
reality
would
is
have came home
so much
if
worse
if
than
your
you could
kid could have came
possibly think
home.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I what would you do? What would you do as a parent in that, and that's I think what haunts me about it too is just the way that parents went to the police and they said this is not right. I know my child, like I know my child, and this is not right, and they are missing. And the police shrugged them off and said that's a runaway. What would you do? Like that is your last line of defense, your last help, your last hope at finding your child.
And they're just doing nothing. What are you supposed to do? Every
Which
resource that you've been given hasn't worked.
you've been tapped. Yeah. You tapped all of them. Yeah, and that's the problem though too. I mean, there's so many families that just had to hold on and hope for so many years. And I I already know. I mean, I've read so many articles and I mean, I'm sure it's not enough to ever fully grasp what that would be like. Like, I cannot for the life of me imagine, like, if anything happened to my brothers growing
Right.
up, or like, you know, especially like this, because Dean Coral is his own kind of monster. He is sadistic. I mean, he's got issues.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Um, and what he would do is, it's just, yeah. So yeah, but this whole time, Dean is basically building this relationship with David Owen Brooks.
Okay.
And this is over years, you know. So around the time that David is 14, 15 years old, Dean starts kind of propositioning him for sex. And not necessarily like full blown sex, but Dean Coral would basically be like, hey, um, I'll buy you this, or I'll give you this much money if you let me do things to you, is what I'm going to say for this podcast. I'm not going to go too far into detail, just because I don't think it's appropriate, and I don't.
We're pretty graphic. We're not fully graphic.
Yeah, I just don't think it's needed, because you can kind of get the picture that it's assault, and it's not good. And there was us already such a solid dynamic, because like I said, I mean, David Owen Brooks has been by Dean's side for the past 3-4 years, and he has been
Right.
learning from this man that he looks up to like a father, and this guy is taking full advantage of that, shitting
Absolutely.
on any kind of bond that they could have had. um it's very, to me, just super disturbing. But I mean, that was kind of their arrangement for a little while. um so 1968 rolls around, Coral Candy Company shuts down. They are dunsies.
Oh
um
no, no more candy shop.
yeah, no more prowling
Oh,
around picking your next victim.
oh no.
Darn tootin'.
Whatever will you do?
Oh God, it's not good. It's not good what he does do, because he does resort. He does outsource, is what he said. But
Outsource is a wild choice of words, bro.
that's, well, I mean, he did. It's so bad. It's so bad. The whole case.
It's awful.
It's so bad. And yeah, okay. So yes, 1968, Coral Candy Company shuts down. They are game over, dunsies. During this time, Dean's mother, Mary, she had also remarried at some point in there to her third husband. Around the time that the Coral Candy Company shut down, her and her third husband also divorced. Game over.
Bad news for Mary.
Yeah, double whammy. Like, it's the
I guess
business.
it's like a triple whammy because your son's a creeper, your candy shop shut down, and you got divorced.
All three. All three. She does not know he is a creeper. Well, and that's also another, like, huge part of this case, is this whole time Dean Coral, because basically after this point, 1968, he can't work at the Coral Candy Company. It doesn't exist.
Right.
Um, and his mom and sister, if you remember the one that his mom had with Jake West, the
Right,
traveling
yeah.
salesman, um, they moved to Colorado. After the business is done, after the divorce from the third husband, they're gone, they're done. He decides, I'm going to stay here. I want to be in Houston. He gets a job at the electric company. So during the whole time of these crimes, he is working his job at the electric company. He is also like renting out various places. He moves so many times throughout this case. Like, I didn't specify exactly where each one of these people were killed.
Right.
Each one of these victims, just because there were so many different places that he lived. Like, each one was almost in a different location. Um, but I mean, he kept up a job. His landlord said he was a great tenant. His coworkers said that he was a great guy. They absolutely loved him. He did his job. He dated a girl on and off during this time, and she was like, yeah, no, he was a gentleman. He like wasn't even aggressive with me. Um,
Yeah, because you're not his type, bestie.
well, and that's why I'll speak about this experience because it was a consensual experience. And she spoke about it herself. But she said that one time they were being intimate together, and about halfway through, he stopped. And he was like, he's done because he just wasn't feeling it anymore.
Yeah, you're really not his type, bestie.
Yeah, no. So that's kind of what I was like, I that would have kind of drew red flags for me. But basically, I mean, she was like, he wasn't sexually aggressive at all. If anything, he was a gentleman. He was super sweet. Um, and she didn't think it was weird at all. 90% of the time when she hung out with him or was around him, she had kids of her own, keep in mind. So that's also like its own kind of disturbing fact, which I didn't find any information about like how much the kids were around Dean Coral, what he did, if he did anything with, you know, his kids or not.
That's exactly what I was gonna ask you. If she had her own kids, if there was anything like going on between him and her kids. But if you didn't find anything, then well, I mean, I guess it doesn't
I
necessarily
would
mean that it
assume
didn't happen.
not, but like, I don't know. I don't know because families are really good about also, especially because I mean, in that case, he obviously wouldn't have murdered the child because
Right.
their mom would have been like, he murdered my child. Uh, so, you know, I mean, they could just because people do sweep so much stuff underneath the rug. But I mean, I would assume because she was so willing to talk about this experience, like if that were a part of it, she probably would have talked about that as well.
Right.
But I mean, also maybe not, because maybe she would have done the right thing and thinking, I shouldn't talk about my children's experience without their, input.
Right.
So I don't know. I don't know, but everybody thought he was normal. Everybody thought he was a good old dude, just hanging out, being a good dude noodle.
Doing his electric services or
Work
whatever they
is,
do.
you know,
Yeah.
worky work, clock in, clock out. So in 1970, David Brooks is going to be 15 years old, and he decides he's going to drop out of school and move to Baymont and live with his mother. And he does do that for quite a while. During that time period, he does visit Houston kind of on and off. When he is visiting, every single time he visits, he makes sure to see Dean Coral. Like he is still seeing that man. That is his friend, his money friend, his candy man, and he was all over seeing him. Ironically enough, he did not. Well, I guess it's, I don't know if it's that ironic, uh, but he did not stay in Baymont very long. Later that year, so as much as he did stay there like for a few months, so I said for a while, but I mean he stayed there for a few months. Later that same year, he did end up moving back to Houston. And I mean, as much as he was staying with his dad in Houston, he was staying at Dean Coral's house pretty much almost as regularly as he was at his dad's house. Really specified exactly what the date was whenever this incident happened. It was in 1970, though, December 1970. Dean is in his house. David walks into Dean's house, sees Dean in there, and he is assaulting two boys. He has got them tied up and he is assaulting them.
Oh my god.
Yes.
He just walked in
Yeah.
and saw him doing that.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Imagine you walk in and your friend's doing something like that. I mean, you already know that he's doing stuff like that because he's doing it to you. But
this is like another level, though. It's
right,
like,
yeah.
like these boys are tied up. Like, this is not, his situation where he was groomed for 3 years before anything kind of was requested. Like, this is boys held against their will being assaulted right in front of you.
Right. So is this like his light bulb moment where he's like, "Oh, something here is not quite right."
No. It's not funny. It's not funny.
It's not funny at all.
Just, I mean, like you would think.
Right.
Anybody, I feel like you would think. But I give like just a little bit of lax in the way that I don't know that relationship. And
Right.
I don't know what I would do in that moment with being manipulated and groomed as hard as he was for as long as he was. And that basically, I mean, what happened, Dean like looked at him, snapped at him, was like, what, what in the hell are you doing here? Uh, David was like, I don't, like, turned around immediately, like, didn't say anything, turned around and like
What do
left.
you mean? I'm not here anymore.
Literally, literally. He said, I don't exist. Um, but that's the sad part. That is so sad because at that point, if David Owen Brooks would have went to the police and said, "Hey, this is what I just saw. Like, this is not okay." This could have been over.
Right. Like immediately over.
Immediately over. And this case, I mean, this is a very long case. Like, I'm going to start listing off names at a point and you're going to be like, "How? How at this point did nobody, with this many weird happenings, with this many weird things, how did nobody think maybe someone's killing all these fucking kids?"
Right.
Um so yeah, not not good. Um so initially, later on, Coral and David, they're talking, and Coral tells David, he says, "I am a part of a gay pornography ring in California," and he had been paid to send those boys to California so that they could pose for photos.
The boys that he had been tied up and assaulting.
Yes, that the boys that he had been
Okay.
assaulting when David walked into the house, he said that he had been paid by the gay sex ring, the gay pornography sex ring that he was a part of. He got paid to send those boys to them, and that's what he did in his free time. Now, um, he later recants this story, and he tells, like, I strangled the boys and I buried them in the shed. Uh, so I mean, the likelihood that's most likely what probably happened,
Right.
but I thought it was interesting to know Coral also sweetened this deal by promising David. He let him know, he was like, if you keep this secret for me and you don't tell the police or don't tell anybody what you saw here, I'm going to get you a brand new car. I'm going to get you a brand new Chevy Corvette, a green Chevy Corvette.
Not a Corvette.
Yes, a brand new one. And keep in mind that David Brooks at this point is 15 years old. He's about to be 16 years old, driver license age. And Coral's telling him, as long as you don't go, which is already somebody that he looks at the way that he does, has been groomed for so long by, uh, you know, he's he's offering him, just this kind of deal of like, keep my secret and I'll make sure you're taken care of.
Right. Bribing him for his silence so he doesn't report him.
Yeah. Yeah. The way that he should have, for real though.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we can all say, what you would do. But Coral also makes a brand new offer, and he tells David that if he brings him more boys, that he will give David $200 per head per boy that he brings him.
So a Corvette for silence and $200 a piece for each boy that he brings to him.
Yes, which $200 does not sound like a crazy amount of money, but I did look at it, and $200 is equivalent to about $1,600 today.
Holy crap.
So he was offering him, this boy who is, I would say kind of a victim of absent parent. His dad always working, his mom not living, near,
Right.
where, he has that support. And he's being offered, 1,600 per head.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to work if that's the kind of deal. A little disturbing deal that Dean Dean Coral cooked up for David Owen Brooks. And that's also the biggest problem with this case, is that these are, you know, people that he perpetrated and that he groomed that ended up also being assailants, though, and that ended up also being perpetrators and murderers, overall. Like, you participated and kept quiet about something that was horrible. Horrible.
Horrific.
Before the murder of the two unnamed boys that David had seen in, early December, Jeffrey Conan was an 18-year-old freshman college student. He had just been admitted to the University of Texas, you know, living that freshman lifestyle, having a good time.
Turning up.
Right? University of Texas, not a bad time. 1970, not a bad time. Couldn't be. I doubt it.
Of course not.
But he was hitchhiking back home with a friend that he had made at University of Texas, and they got pretty far together. But he was dropped off in the like uptown Houston kind of area around 6:15 on September 25th of 1970, and that was the last time that he was seen. So kind of a case. This is a case where he's not involved. He didn't bring Jeffrey to Coral, and I think it also kind of supports the idea that I have that Dean Coral himself was killing without the help of anybody, and the fact that there might be way more bodies hiding somewhere that could be victims.
He did by himself.
Yeah, that just well, and I mean that's another part about this, is because Dean Coral never spoke on these victims before he died. He never left a journal. He never left anything behind to indicate the why or the how many or the what even happened here.
So he almost would have gotten away with it.
Oh, he very much almost got away with it. It is very disturbing how this went on, what happened, how long it went on, and the way that it got found out, because it was not from the police being diligent workers.
Right.
But it's basically theorized that Dean Coral kind of pulled up on Jeffrey Conan, and he was like, I'll give you a ride home. And Jeffrey Conan, made the fateful mistake of accepting that ride and going with Dean Coral. Sadly, it looked like he was asphyxiated. And he had been found in a way that suggested he had been assaulted, by his perpetrator, which, was Dean Coral. Very sad kind of situation, but it also kind of shows, I mean, like I said, exactly what Dean Coral is capable of completely on his own.
Absolutely.
Because every part of that, from the fishing, the candidate that he was going to take home, to the murder itself, to the burial of the body, Dean Coral did that all by himself. So, disturb. So, shortly after this point, David kind of falls in line with this program, and he starts bringing Dean Coral boys. December 13th, 1970, David lures James Glass and Danny Yates. This is one of those very sad stories as well. These are two 14-year-old best friends. They are
such babies.
Children. And they were lured away, sadly enough, from a religious rally that they were at. It was a rally that was, I'm pretty sure, based on like the articles that I read, it was a religious rally against drugs and the use of drugs, which, I mean, 1970, you expect.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Part
anti-acid,
anti-pot. For sure.
So they kind of got lured away from that, which sadly, Willie Glass, which was James's older brother, he said he saw the two boys get up from the service like they were going to the bathroom, and then they just vanished. The police barely investigated the case at the time. Um, Basically, what they did is James Glass had a file, Danny Yates had a file. Danny Yates' file got sent with this detective. James Glass' file got sent to this detective. And instead of investigating this case like it was a crime or like it was a disappearance or like it was a missing person, they more so investigated the family and decided that these boys were runaways. Um,
That they
and
just got up of their own free will and left.
and ran away together. Um, Even noticing they didn't have anything on them. You know, they didn't have anything extra. They didn't have any money. They didn't have a bag full of stuff. They didn't have any food on stock. You know, it they were at a religious rally. Family themselves obviously didn't take this very well. They didn't, you know, want to. I mean, I don't think they didn't take this well. But I do think that they kind of went with what the police said in that case, and they just kind of were like trying to find a way to accept that. Um, Willie, again, the brother of James Glass, put out an ad in the green sheet paper offering James a new motorcycle if he would just come home. Um,
Oh, that poor brother. He just wanted him to come home. That's so sad.
just loved him, like just wanted his brother back home. Um, every weekend, the Yates parents and the Glass parents um, they would drive around Houston and they would pass out flyers and they would just, you know, just try and talk about their sons. I mean, the police weren't helping them. The police weren't doing anything. So they had
Right.
to be out there. They had to be the manpower talking about their sons and making sure people didn't forget that these boys existed, you know, and they were here and they were at a religious rally. They were just there, you know. Um,
Why would they run away from somewhere safe?
yeah, yeah, somewhere wholesome.
Somewhere they were supposed to be protected.
Danny Yates' father was so upset and distraught that he had left, quote unquote, because that's what the police had told him. You know, your son's a runaway. He was so distraught that he thought, you know, he blamed himself. He was like, Danny left because I was too hard on him, you know, and
Right.
that's he just wanted his son back, you know. He actually drove all the way to Monterey, New Mexico because he got a tip that Danny was seen out there. And he drove that full distance just to see if he could find his son.
Just to be disappointed.
Just for I mean, which and I mean in a way, um that's a moment to find like a little bit of peace in because it was like only like a couple years later that this all kind of comes to a close and you know they find his body and they can match that up and these families luckily get this answer, you know, that like it's not your fault and your son would have come home if your son could have come home,
Right.
you know. So it's like I said, this is a very, very heavy case. And
So sad.
because this all happened in the Houston Heights kind of area and in Houston, you know, and it's just, I don't see, like, even with that being such a big area, even with there being that many people, when you have that many families coming to you and saying, you know, like, this isn't right, and I know my son didn't run away. How did nobody, how did the receptionist at the front not connect those dots? Like, you know, like even if you're the detective and you don't see every person coming in, how is you as the receptionist? Because you
Right.
see
How
every
are you
family.
not clocking that there are parents on parents on parents on parents coming in here talking about their kid
all
is
from the same area.
missing.
Well, and I would say specifically the Houston Heights area was known to be kind of the poorer part of Houston and the you know, not so affluent area,
Right.
kind of your problem area, and they they just bypassed and they did not have the staff or the want to look into it, and that it was detrimental to families like this. A month later, Dean and David they encountered Donald and Jerry Waldrop.
Oh my god, they look even younger than the last two.
Well, and this is what I will say as well. This was in 1970 that this was taking place. I think some of these photos are from younger days from these kids. It was hard to find these photos. I'm not gonna lie. Some of them had like a decent amount of photos that had been posted up from their like families and stuff. Some of them not so much. Which I don't know. I'm very much trying to cover this with as much respect as possible as I possibly can
Right.
for all of these families, because this is very serious and very sad. Um, so I mean, these photos. I mean, I found what I could. I found what I could. I
Okay.
did had their dad drop them off at their friend's house because they were gonna stop in with that friend and be. They wanted to create a bowling league, and they wanted to create that bowling league with their friend. And so they are like, "Hey, Dad, drop us off here. We're gonna just go knock on the door, stop in, and see them." And so they do. They get out of the car. They're at their friend's house. They're there. They're knocking on the door, and it is not until that point that they realize, oh, my buddy is not home. So their dad has already drove off, and they're like, okay, that's fine. Let's go ahead and walk home. And so it is during this walk home that David and Dean um, get their eyes on Donald and Jerry, and decide to be friggin' heathens. Um, they met the same fate as our previous victims. Um, Dean Coral really had the same kind of MO of like assault, torture, strangle, or shoot, and then find. There was three places that he really kind of buried, and that was more of like the shed. And then there were two different like beach locations that he would bury bodies at, which was very, yeah, all of it just super disturbing. Whenever they were finally actually getting into this case, the media around it and like watching them, like cameras watching them dig up the crime scene
Right.
and watching police like remove bodies out of the graves. Um, so sad, just so sad and so bewildering because I mean, you'll see that, and then like further in the background, you can see people playing on the beach, and you're just like, this is so, just, like, just no, no.
No.
So now we're moving on to our next one. Um, March 9th, 1971, Randall Harvey was on his way to work. He was riding his bike. He was spotted by Coral and Brooks. Brooks had known Harvey pretty well, and he was able to coax him into Coral's car. Um, Basically, kind of the same fate situation. He was assaulted and then shot and buried. Randall's sister had heard a rumor that Brooks had killed him over a stolen speaker, though, and that was something that she had mentioned back then at that point. And it also showed that police reports had gotten a tip from a tipper that said that Brooks had killed Randall. So there was a couple fingers being pointed at David Brooks already.
And there was still nothing done with people pointing their fingers at him.
No, no. With there not being a body, they did kind of the same as they had done with all of the other boys. This is a runaway situation. And so they didn't care about even a theory of like, my brother might be fucking dead at this point. Like, they didn't want to hear it. They were like, that's a runaway. He's alive. He's just run away. And it's so sad. Okay. May 29th, 1971. 13-year-old David Hillegeist and 16-year-old George Winkler. They are spotted by coral. I'm sorry. So David Hillegeist and George Winkle. Again, I think these are way younger photos of these guys. They were, David Hillegeist was 13 at this point, and George Winkle was 16 at this point. So I do feel like these are kind of some younger photos of them. But basically, these boys left one day hanging out, and they did not return home. So obviously, their parents are very concerned. They're going to the police. They're talking to them. Um, they're like, my kid's missing. Like, this makes no sense. Um, so yeah, no, so the parents, they went to the police. This is one of those cases where the police kind of looked at them and they were like, kids run away from the best of homes, and you know there's not really anything we can do about that. It's not a crime to run away from home. And they did not help them at all. It was a runaway situation and no search for your kids, nothing. So the Hillegeist, but the Winkle family, along with the Hillegeist, both were heavily involved in creating flyers and passing out flyers and posting flyers, and really trying to make sure that their sons were not forgotten. Um,
Just trying to make sure that something is done for them since the police were not doing anything.
anything. Yeah, yeah. Well, and so it was that night, right before midnight, that George Winkle calls his mom and says that he is in Freeport. This is a town that's about 60 miles away. George says that he was swimming with a bunch of boys and that they're going to bring him home later the next day. The next day, obviously, still no George, still no David. Um, their friends said that they saw George and David in a white van, but they did not know where they were at that point. And so there was just pretty much no more information beyond that. Even noticing, I will say, I did get quite a bit of information on this one. This was the kid that I was talking about, David Hillegeist, right there. He was the kid who his family was going on vacation the very next day, and he had his suitcase set up, ready to go. He had his
Aww.
$20 there. Um, and the police still, this
Just
was that case,
classified it as a
a
fucking
runaway,
runaway.
knowing full well how excited, obviously, he would have been to go on a vacation and completely pushing it to the side. Miss Hillegeist, David's mother, did tell police that she had noticed George Winkle had a friend who drove a Plymouth GTX. She said that the license plate on that Plymouth GTX was TMF 724. Now, if the police would have even just taken her serious for like 0.5 seconds and looked up this license plate, he would have seen that this Plymouth GTX was registered to Dean Coral.
Oh my god, no way.
Yes.
Half
There,
a fraction of a second to do your job and it would have been done.
just to take it serious for 2 seconds. Uh and they didn't. Um but like I said, I mean, these families, George Winkle's family, David Hillegeist's family, they consistently continued to hand out flyers and posters and try and talk about their son. The Hillegeist even got help from some of the local community, including one Elmer Wayne Henley. Um, the entrance of Elmer Wayne Henley to this story is um, quite a big part of it. It's kind of the beginning of the end at that point. Um, but we've still got a little bit that happened before Henley was fully involved with Dean and David. So at this point, when Elmer is here helping the Hillegeist hand out these flyers, he does not know who Dean Coral is, and he does not, he doesn't know anything about what Dean Coral is doing. So
Okay.
he is genuinely at the Hilligeist house helping because he knew David Hilligeist and they were friends growing up. And so he wanted to help out handing out papers, and kind of which
As
that's
you would when your friend goes missing.
yeah, no, like a lifelong friend, which his parents did offer a reward for, if there was any information that would lead to the return of the sons. So very, very sad. Like I said, I mean, a lot of these cases are families that they didn't get an answer until the day that those bodies were dug up. And even when they were dug up because of different states of decomposition, it was years before a lot of families found any kind of peace from this. And I mean, I doubt you ever truly do with knowing the kind of killer that Dean Coral was. But August 17th, 1971, David and Dean Coral together encountered David's friend, Reuben Wilford Watson. Um, Reuben was on his way home from the movie theater when David convinced him to come to a party at Coral's apartment. Kind of his MO of offering, uh, marijuana, a little bit of alky alk to another youngin'. And I mean, of course, they look at David. David is, 16, 17 years old at this point. He's the same age as these boys that he's like, luring over there. Like, why would they not have
Right.
a reason to trust him? Like, obviously, if he's going over there and hanging out and he's not dying, I'll
Right,
be fine.
obviously, it's safe for me to go because this other kid is going and he's doing it and he's just fine.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I see him around all the time. Obviously, this Coral dude can't be too bad. Um, so at one point, sadly, Ruben did call home and let his parents know that he was going to stay the night with David Brooks. Um,
Oh
he
no.
ended up being strangled and buried. Um, that's kind of a thing that got me too, because in a lot of these cases, they said, I'm staying the night with this person. I'm gonna be,
Right, like they gave a name of like where they were.
and the police still didn't, still just was like, no, okay. Um, so
Wild.
in the September time of things, I would just put like three photos of a question mark face here because they do not have names. They do not have names. David Brooks stated that he and Coral killed three more boys during this month. During literally whatever time period during this month, right before Henley really joined the picture. And the identity of these boys has been unknown. Elmer Wayne Henley. So this is kind of like I said, the beginning of our end character here.
Okay.
Elmer Wayne Henley grew up in kind of a different situation than David Brooks. His family was very abusive. His dad was an alcoholic and he was very, very physically abusive from, um, beating Elmer's mom all the way down to assaulting his own children. Um, and Elmer really kind of had to deal with that all the way until 1970 when his mother finally divorced his father and he was free from the abuse. But his mother being single did have its own host of challenges as well. They no longer had the financial security that they had once had with him living with his, dad.
Right.
Um, During this whole time period as well, Elmer has been hanging out with David Brooks. They're hanging out at school, they're leaving school together, they're kind of ditch buddies. And Elmer decides, it's time once he hits junior high, he's going to leave school and he begins to work part time to help his mom kind of pay some of the bills.
Okay.
Um, so in December of 1971, Brooks brings Henley, and it was most likely that Brooks was bringing Elmer Wayne Henley to Dean Coral as a victim for him to murder, muck
Mhm.
duck. Um,
Yes.
but Elmer pretty much kind of they hit it off. Like they were pretty good friends. I don't know. I guess Elmer Wayne Henley had that the rhythm for the old man.
Ah.
Um, he got him to not want to kill him. Uh, which I would say, Henley was quoted as saying maybe Dean considered me as one of his next victims, but we hit it off. He was this smart, clean cut, nicely dressed man. He listened to me, he explained things to me. I'll be honest with you. It was important that Dean liked me. He was kind. And so
Mm.
that's Henley's own words about Dean. Even knowing everything that we know right now, which, and I will say at this point, when Dean and Henley are meeting, Henley does not know all of the details about the crimes that they have.
Right, because it's not like Dean's just gonna come out and say, "Hey, I be out here murdering people."
Right. Well, yeah, like I just murdered your best friend David Hill, guys. Like I'm out here killing kids. Like he's not gonna say that.
Right.
So d- to him, Henley at that point in time, he thought it was just really important that Dean liked him. He thought, he was kind of the same way Brooks looked at Dean Corll. This man who takes me seriously and he talks to me and he explains things to me, um, and he's there for me. Um, and I mean that's one of the scary things for Henley as well is Dean Corll really embedded himself in Elmer's life. He began gardening at his house as far as like mowing his lawn and helping with the shrubs and the bushes. And Elmer's mom liked Dean Corll so much that she invited him to Easter dinner. So at this point, Dean Corll has embedded himself in the life of Elmer Wayne Henley. He has got his mom thinking that he's a great man, and
There's just no getting away from him at this point.
yeah, no, not for Elma. Um, so eventually, Coral kind of starts hinting at this, secret life that he has. And Coral tells Henley that if he has anything to sell, even if it's an illegal item, Coral can pretty much, get rid of it for him.
Mm.
He can sell any item that he has. And then not too long after he says that kind of, a little bit risque sentence, he tells Henley kind of the same story that he tells David Brooks. And he tells him, I'm involved with this gay homosexual, porn ring, uh, involved in California. And, I'm basically shipping these boys off there and I'm making money off of it. And he offers Henley the same exact offer that he offers Brooks. And he says, I'll give you $200 for every boy you can bring me.
No
And
convertible this time.
no convertible. No convertible. He did not get the softened blow with the Chevy Convert. But he did offer him that same $1,600. Pretty much. That's what it would be in today's money. Again, it was $200
Right.
at that point in time. And this is to a boy who his mom is struggling financially. They don't have anything. He has younger siblings as well. And he's being made this offer of $1,600, which is way more than you could make part time.
Right.
You know what I'm
At that
saying?
time, that's an unbelievable amount of money for a child to be making.
Yeah.
Let alone an adult person, but a child.
Yeah. No, like a teenage 15-year-old boy, you
Yeah.
know? So I mean, it was said, and I have read a few different sources on kind of Henley's character because he did talk a lot. And I mean, the quotes that I read from him, he seems to have like a very crass personality, a very kind of tell it how it is. But I mean, yeah, because there was also like parts in this case where he seems like he was more involved in the murders. So it's kind of hard to decipher whether Henley, like where he really falls on the spectrum of how much of a perpetrator and how much of a victim he was. But I would say, I mean, in the case, regardless, if you're 15 years old, there's an adult male in your life that has kind of a sway over you, especially considering like he comes from a broken home. His father obviously is not a role model.
Right.
So,
Clearly not.
like beating his mom. So you meet Dean Coral and you think, well, this is a real man. This is a real role model.
Right.
And then he starts telling you about this porn ring and this way he makes money and how the world works and all this kind of stuff. And he kind of fell into it, but I've also read that he held off for as long as he could, and then he eventually, to help his mom with their financial strain, decided to take Dean Coral up on this offer. um so it's either late February or early March of 1972. Henley accepts Dean's offer and lures a boy to Dean's house under the guise of smoking pot. Henley did a handcuff trick, which I am specifically mentioning this handcuff trick because it is quite similar to another serial killer who was caught not much long after Mr. Dean Coral here. Um,
Wow.
yeah, yeah, a little correlation there. It's a little weird.
Mm.
But basically, Henley did this handcuff trick where he put the handcuffs on. He had a key hidden in his back pocket, and he unlocked the handcuffs using the key. He then had this boy that he lured down there, put the handcuffs on, obviously not with the key this time, and the boy was locked up. Henley then left that boy in the care of Dean Coral under the assumption that Dean Coral was going to sell this boy into his ring. Um, Coral, paid Henley his $200. He left in Elmer, or all together on March 24th, 1972, so later that month. And they see Elmer's friend Frank Aguirre leaving his job at Long John Silver's. Henley convinces Frank to join the trio as they drink and smoke marijuana at Coral. Aguirre, who was friends with Elmer Wayne Henley, they got Frank to come with them, and Frank basically he followed in his own car behind them, but drove to Coral's house, and they all, kind of smoked marijuana, got a little alcohol, and then at some point, Frank grabs the handcuffs that are sitting on the table. For some reason, this like triggers Coral, and he jumps on Frank, cuffs him up, and then like starts his assault on Frank. Which Henley said that when he brought Frank to Coral's house, he did not think that that's what Coral had planned on doing. He didn't know that he was setting his friend up like
I'm
that.
sure if he had known, he probably wouldn't
Brought
have
his
let him
friend.
come there.
Well,
Yeah.
and I mean, I don't know. I don't know because I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know
Right.
Elmer Wayne Henley. I'm not inside his head. So I mean, he
Right.
might have brought his friend there for the $200 and been like, is what it is. But he is quoted as saying, I didn't intend on that, and I didn't plan for that to happen. I It kind of came as a surprise.
Right.
April 20th of 1972 rolls around. Henley, Coral, and Brooks spot 17-year-old Mark Scott. This is one of the saddest cases. Mark Scott was a very big fighter for his life. He ended up getting a hold of a knife, and he was very avidly trying to fight them off. He even snagged Coral's shirt, and almost cut him.
Wow.
Uh, and then that was when Dean Coral pulled out his gun. And it's so sad. David Brooks was quoted as saying that, like, when Mark saw the gun, he just gave up.
He just stopped fighting. He knew it was done.
Yeah, and
That's
just
so
gave up.
sad.
Um,
Poor baby tried so hard.
he did. He did. He tried so hard. Well, and I think the other worst kind of part about this is like his parents knew immediately too. They knew immediately that he was gone and that it was not good. Um, Basically, they had made Mark write a letter to his parents saying he had found work in Austin, Texas. And keep in mind, this is a junior in high school. Mark Scott is 17 years old, junior in high school. he found work in Austin, Texas, and he'd be staying there for a few days. And he was making $3 an hour, which $3 an hour is equivalent to $23 today.
Wow.
So
So that was quite a hypothetical big chunk of money for them.
being
So
a junior in high school, like what do you specialize in? What skill do you have to make $23 an hour?
right.
You know,
Where did you find work?
paying $23 an hour.
Yeah.
That and Mark didn't let them know anything. He also didn't have any issues in his personal life. And like I said, a junior in high school. This is a boy who's enrolled in school. He had no want to leave school or anything like that. So what 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 happened? What do you mean?
What do you mean you're going to Austin because you found work out there?
A $23 an hour paying job. He
Right.
also left behind his Honda C70 motorcycle, and his parents kind of knew immediately from that as well that like this isn't
Something's
a
not
runaway.
right here.
Yeah, this isn't a runaway. This isn't my kid finding a job. Like this is bad. This is bad.
Yeah, something's wrong.
June 26th, 1972, Dean, Henley, and Brooks capture Billy Bulk and or Bulch, assaulted and tortured. This is one of those cases. This is the one where there is information about Henley and his involvement in the case that makes it just super fucking disturbing. It makes you think like you're not a victim, like you're a fucking perpetrator for sure.
Right.
Basically, he strangled Billy first, and like Johnny is alive watching this happen and take place. And then Elmer decides to scream, "Hey, Johnny," as he shoots Johnny in the head. Surprisingly, this shoot in the head does not kill Johnny, and he like begged for his life before Elmer Wayne Henley ultimately strangled him to death.
Oh my god.
And that was like Henley was quoted as saying he had a fascination with the stamina that people had. He was also quoted saying like he didn't realize it was that hard to strangle somebody. So I mean, I don't know. I look at the two accomplices there with Dean Coral, and I feel like Henley was a lot more sadistic than Brooks ever was, and was a lot more involved. Like this, it's just disturbing. And also, like, you really need to keep in mind that these are kids that they go to school with. These are kids that they had classes with. These are kids that
They've
were
known since they were small.
since they were kids. These were kids that were at the candy shop. You know?
Right.
These were kids that have been scoped out for years. And yeah, people that he's known for years and just willing to kill them. So, Schuler Street, the mysterious case of William Rittinger. This case, which I don't even think I got, yeah, no, I didn't even get a photo of him, which I should have done. But William Rittinger, he was the only person caught by Dean Coral that got away. Which Brooks basically in court said, you know, like I begged Dean Coral, you know, to let him go after he was done assaulting him. And because Brooks begged Dean Coral, he let him go. But then later that month, Henley knocked Brooks out as he was coming into Dean Coral's house. Dean Coral ties David Brooks up and assaults him numerous times before he eventually lets him go. So,
Wait, he assaulted his accomplice
David
multiple
Brooks,
times.
the one who convinced him not to assault or really murder William Rittinger.
Wow.
But like the weird part is because both Henley and you know David Brooks, and it's like this is what really got me thinking in my noggin, like a turning, Is like, is this exclusive? Is this murdering the way Dean Coral is this exclusive to this part of his life? Is this exclusive to Dean Coral, Elmer Wayne Henley and David Brooks? Or are these things that Dean Coral's been doing for years? Are there other boys that he had, groomed in to bring him more boys?
Right.
That had either aged out of it and married or something like that. Because keep in mind, this didn't end because of good police work. So, how long? How long was he successfully actually doing this?
Right.
And
How many more victims are there that we just don't know about?
Exactly. Exactly. Or other help that he might have had. And I'm not going to say anything because that it's very difficult. Like, that's horrible. It's a horrible situation. And William Rittinger, I'm not sure if he is still alive or not. But I mean, I can't imagine going through that experience. So I'm not saying one way or another that he himself was involved, um, you know, in these killings or in these perpetrations of victims. But I think about that question because he was he assaulted everybody that helped him. He assaulted everybody that was around him. So, how many more people were around Dean Coral, getting hurt
Right.
and manipulated and lied to. So on July 19th, 1972, Coral sets his sights on 17-year-old Stephen Sickman. This youth was last seen at a party right before midnight on July 19th. His body was not identified until 2011. So this is one of those cases where the family sat there waiting and waiting and waiting
For years and years and years
just to
for
know.
an answer.
Just to know. And most likely, I mean, based on he was leaving a party, it was almost midnight. That was the last time he was seen. Most likely, Coral came across him, offered him a ride home, and that led to where that led to, which is kind of the same fate as most of the other victims involved, sadly enough. But August 21st, 1972, Coral sees Roy Button as he is walking to his job at a shoe store. This is the middle of broad daylight. And he ends up, um, stealing Roy Button. Kind of the same fate befalls him as the other victims, same kind of torture, strangulation, shot kind of memo. And then this is another body that sat there and waited until 2011 to be identified. So it's I mean, it's sad. It's heartbreaking, and especially because these were some of the first murders. Not some of the first murders. We're gonna have to cut that out. But these murders, these weren't ones that were talked about by David Brooks or by Elmer Wayne Henley. So these were ones that were not known by them. They were not involved in. So how many more? How many more genuinely are there that David and, Elmer don't know about?
Right.
Did you do October 3rd, 1972, Henley and Brooks spot Wally Jason Minot and Richard Hembry. So they were either having dinner, like basically Wally's mom was making dinner and offering his friends to come over. Like either that's what was happening and Richard and him were on their way to go invite their other friend over, or they were going back to Richard's house, or they were going to the high school. There are a few different things on that I found of like what they were going to do, or why they were together and out and about. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure which one they were up to or what they were going to do. But either way, they got spotted by Henley and Brooks, and Henley and Brooks were able to convince the boys to get into that fantastic green Chevy Corvette. I should say Corvette, shouldn't I? Corvette, like duvet. Oh God. So either way, Brooks and Henley were able to convince the boys to get into that great Chevy Corvette that Dean Corll had got Brooks for his silence. Basically, they get to Corll's house, kind of the same fate. This time, though, Wally J. Simino, he was able to get to the phone, and he was able to call home that night. He shouted the word "mama" into the phone, and then the line was cut.
Oh.
While he was able to get to a phone that night, he called his family, shouted "mama." The line was cut. The boys were still alive for that night. The next morning, though, Henley accidentally shot Richard Hembry in the mouth. And a few hours later, I guess they made kind of the executive decision to strangle both of the boys, and they were murdered and buried. Again, just gotcha. Doesn't make no sense. What's going on? And I mean, keep in mind, these are not like far apart. This is July 1972, August 1972, October 1972. This is, in this case, specifically, these two, this is multiple boys at once.
Right.
This isn't one
after
boy.
another.
And these are almost every month. November 1972. Corll caught 18-year-old Willard Rusty Branch. Rusty was hitchhiking from Mount Vernon to Houston when he went missing. Rusty was also known to Ernest Wayne Henley and David Brooks. It was some of the sources that I found said that Rusty's father was a police radio technician, and for whatever reason, Corll did not like Rusty. Was very not a fan of him. Dean Corll mutilated Rusty's body in a way that he didn't typically kind of mutilate the body. And that kind of indicated more of an anger and a, bigger dislike.
Right. Some kind of hatred towards that particular victim.
Yeah. Whether it be, I mean, and I don't know, because his dad was apparently a police radio station technician. So, having that link with the police, I don't know if that kind of caused its own rift.
Not sure why, though, because what does he have to be afraid of the police for? They're not doing anything anyway.
Right, to him. Right. But, I mean, it's like, I don't know. I just don't know, because there's not really a reason for why they would hate him or why he didn't like him so much. But it was said, like, and Henley said that as well, that that Dean Corll hated him. Was not one of his favorite victims. So November 15th rolls around. Literally, I'm pretty sure that's the same month on that. Yeah, November 15th, same month that they, still Rusty. Corll caught Richard Kepner. Kepner was on his way to a phone booth. Literally just walking to go make a call. And he was lured into Corll's car. Met the same fate as pretty much all of our other victims that we've already talked about. November 15th, 1972 was kind of like the last one for a bit, though. Basically, the next murder rolls around February 1973. Corll had recently moved to a new apartment. Not even 2 weeks in, Joseph Lyles is the next victim. He is, kind of same fate. Assault, strangulation, or shot, and then buried. Basically, for like the rest, so I'm assuming this happened in early February. For the rest of February and the early part of June, there's not really any murders or anything. The police account for that with Corll having been sick. He wasn't doing too much murder, as he's vomiting. So, June 4th, 1973, Henley and Corll abduct 15-year-old William Ray Lawrence. William called his dad that night and asked if he could go fishing with some friends at Lake Sam Rayburn. His father sadly says yes. Um, William meets the same fate as all of the rest of the other victims. Um, you know, never, never returned from that fishing trip.
Right.
Um,
Probably didn't get to go on the fishing trip in the first place,
no,
to be honest.
no. Mid June 1973, which this was one of the first cases that I kind of read about. Coral comes across Raymond Stanley Blackburn. He is a 20-year-old. The only reason he was in Houston at that time was for a construction job that he was there working. He had actually recently got a call from his girlfriend back home that she was pregnant. And, well, okay, no, I got that wrong. So he had recently got a call from back home. She had been pregnant. She ended up having the baby. So he was trying to get back home so that he could see her and see, obviously, his baby. Um,
20 is so much older than the rest of these victims.
yeah, no, it is. It is a little bit, which, and I mean, that's like Raymond Ray Blackburn. He is on kind of the older end of the spectrum here. Most of the victims from Dean Coral were kind of mid-aged teenagers, um, which is just, all of it. Just so disturbing. So disturbing. I mean, like this guy, he was on his way home. He was on his way home to his girlfriend. They knew he was on his way home. And I mean, most likely he was hitchhiking. Most likely that's what Ray was doing. That's why he probably got in Coral's car and, it ended how it ended. And it's just a shame, though. It's a shame because this is one of those missing cases where, like, what are the police going to say in that case? Like, this isn't a man trying to run away from his life. This is somebody
Right.
who is on his way home to his girlfriend, his new child.
I guess at the same time, the argument could be made that he was nervous because she had just had her child. They were potentially going to start a life together, and that scared him. So, I mean, they could have spun it in a way that would make it make sense for him to have run away. But
With
obvious.
her, the only thing that would have, like, kind of, I mean, just with the call being made, but I mean, I don't know. Well, like I said, I mean, at this point, because this is almost 1 month, and so it's like at this point, you would think I have this many people reaching out. And like Ray's family, they reached out from where they were at. So it wasn't from the Houston area. They reached out from where they were at and said, this is a missing person. Like he didn't make it home.
Right.
And when you have that many coming in, that's what gets me the most about it. After this, so we are now into July, early July, July 6th, 1973. Sia is in a driver's ed class with Wayne Henley. They basically were just buddies in their driver's ed class. Mom one night lets her know that she's going to be staying the night. That lets her know that he's going to be staying the night with a friend. And then he never makes it home. So it's kind of it's a very much opportunity kind of meets. And I mean, I don't know, like if I go back and look financially at how much these boys were making, because I mean it's one, like I said, 1 to 2 to 3 per month, and Dean's cashing out $200, which is, like I said, equivalent to $1,600 today, every single time he gets one of these boys. I mean, it's just, this is disturbing. This is disturbing. This is all very disturbing. Um, he really, yeah, he was a criminal, a very big criminal.
Absolutely.
So now here we are, July 12th, 1973. So we're still in the same month. I could not find a photo of John Sellers. None. Nowhere. Did not exist.
No pictures for you.
None for you. None for about like July 19th, 1973. Now it's important to note in 1973 that David Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley are both kind of trying to make their break away from Dean Coral. David Brooks has got a girlfriend of his own. She is pregnant. They also found a place that was kind of a little further away in a different town that they ended up moving to. So, he's really David Brooks by himself is kind of stepping out from this kind of lifestyle altogether at this point. Elmer Wayne Henley, on the other hand, did not have as good of a time. Basically, he tried to apply to go into the army. The army, with Elmer Wayne Henley having dropped out of junior high,
Uh-huh.
and having no real formal education. Sadly, with him having the limited education that he had, the army ended up rejecting Elmer Wayne Henley, which Elmer Wayne Henley, it's such a long name. I've got to call him Henley. We've got to shorten it.
Okay.
Uh, Henley uh, also was quoted as saying that, like, he couldn't leave even if he wanted to. Like, he knew that he couldn't leave because if he did, that would leave Coral free to go after one of his younger brothers that Coral always liked a little bit too much.
Oh.
So Elmer Wayne Henley kind of had that double drawback of feeling like he belonged kind of to Dean Coral, and there's not a way out for him.
Right.
But on this date, in July 19th, 1973, specifically, Michael Bulk, who is so freaking sadly, which I found only the family photo here of the Bulk sons. Sadly, Michael Bulk, who is the younger of them, the baby here, he, his brother Billy, we talked about him earlier in this episode. Billy Bulk was murdered by Dean Coral. And it was only at this point in July 19th that they finally got his younger brother Michael as well, as he was on his way to get his hair cut.
Aw.
Even sadder, the last thing that it was quoted his mom, telling him was that, like, his hair was too long and he needed to get his hair cut. And, that's what he was going to do, was going to
Cut his hair to appease his mom.
Yep. And Coral snatched him up. And even, I mean, it's so sad. It's so sad, especially from it being two kids in the same family. Um, just ridiculous. Ridiculous that the police also didn't, like, that point, Billy Bullock's mom coming back into the police station saying, my son Michael he's been taken, I need your help.
Right. Like another one of my children is just gone.
Gone, vanished, and you guys are not doing anything about it. I mean, I can't imagine how heartbreaking that would be, especially knowing how they already handled Billy's case himself. So just knowing already to have such a low expectation at finding any help with, your child that's missing. So again, shortly after that, we're hitting July 25th, 1973. Charles Coble and Marty Ray Jones were lured into Coral's apartment. Allegedly, Coral. This one was one of the most messed up stories. I was going in to read exactly kind of what I wrote down about it, but it was very, very, very sad. Which, and this is based, I mean, on story. Like, I compiled a lot of different information. So, I hate to say anything without there being the absolute set in fact, there. But it was said that Coral had the two boys fight each other, telling them, like, whoever wins can leave. And then he basically had them do that for like days. Coble was kind of more on the losing end of it. So he basically had Jones watch as he like tortured and assaulted Coble, and then, killed him. And then he did the same thing to Marty Ray Jones.
So fucked up.
So fucked up. Well, and I would say at this time period too, David Brooks and Henley had said, like, Dean Coral's bloodlust was just like at an all-time high. Like, he was like itching and fiending for more boys and for more of this just chaos. Um, so fucking disgusting, so nasty. And like I said, I mean, this story, I don't know exactly. I wasn't there, so I'm not full on quoting it. That might not even be the story. That might not be what happened with them. But it's just, more of the disturbing things about this case that, they could very well be true. They could very well be true. But August 3rd, 1973, they come across James Staten, uh, Drimula. This would be the last victim of Dean Corll, as this is about to come to a very big kind of culmination here. Um, he was lured to Corll by Brooks and Henley. They told him that he was out riding his bike in Pasadena. They told him that they were going to go look for glass bottles to cash in. And that is how they got James to come and get in the car. Apparently Coral spent like quite a while hanging out with James, like about 45 minutes hanging out with him, like even bought him pizza and stuff like that. And then that's when he kind of out of nowhere began what Dean Corll did. Um, Super, just another sad kind of situation that did not need to happen. Um, so this is all kind of leading up. I skipped a little bit. Okay. So this all leads up to August 8th of 1973. So this is literally, like a week later after the death of James Drimula. Like I said, the last victim of Dean Corll's. So on the day of August 8th, 1973. Okay, are you good? Henley invites his friend Thomas Curley over to Corll's house, of course, to be a next intended victim for Corll.
Mm-hmm.
Corll, however, was not home at this point. So Henley's there with his buddy. They're like, fuck it, let's huff some paint. So that's what they did. They huffed paint for so many hours, all the way until midnight. I laugh. It's not funny, but I mean,
it's a long goddamn time to be huffing some paint.
That's like no brain cells left time huffing paint.
Yeah, for sure. They're
like
French fried at that point.
Yeah. A little toasted, roasted. But it hit around midnight. They basically decided to drive back to where Curley was from, like that part of Houston. And then as they were getting out of their car, they hear kind of some noise over at the house of Rhonda Williams. Rhonda Williams had actually dated one of the victims that we had talked about earlier, Frank Aguirre, the friend that Henley said that he did not realize Corll was going to kill. So she actually dated one of the victims, but she was stumbling out of her house. Based on the story, her father had come home super drunk, wasted. They got in an argument, and he had hurt her. She had sprained her ankle. So just, I'm assuming kind of, to get out of that kind of chaotic situation, they offered her to come with them, and she took up that offer, and they all headed back to Corll's house.
Oh, no.
Yes. Oh, no. Oh, no. So, when Corll did eventually come home, he played like he was totally cool with it. He was like, yeah, this is so fine, whatever. Everybody get drunk. Let's have paint, party. Then the moment that all three of the teens were passed out, he like hogtied them all up. And then, kind of woke them up. And at that point, he pulled Henley into the kitchen. And he basically tore into Henley, like letting him know how disrespected if he felt that Henley had brought a girl over, and that, he knew better than to bring a girl, and that now, he's going to torture and kill all of them, all three of them.
Jeez.
Yes, very much cheese. Henley, however, kind of thinking on his feet, let him know basically he promised Dean Coral, and he said, I'm not gonna shit. I'm sorry. I have like sentences starting and then they don't go through. Okay. So, scene. Uh okay, so Henley basically goes in immediately promising Dean. He's like, I'm so sorry, like you trying to get back in his good graces. I'm so sorry about this girl here. Like, like it doesn't have to be this way. Like, I can assault her. I'll torture her. I'll do everything to her and you do everything to him. And then we can murder them together. And, you know, uh, I'll be a part of this. And we'll basically, like 50-50 split this murder on Rhonda Williams and Thomas Curley. So Dean kind of thinks about it for a little bit and he decides to untie Henley. And he lets him go. And basically, he gets, Thomas Curley and Rhonda Williams and he pushes them back to his room and he gets them all set up to where he would kind of, do what he did. And he just like starts in. Like Dean Coral's ready to go and he's starting in on Thomas Curley. So while he is distracted, Henley goes and he gets Coral's gun. And basically, I guess from what Rhonda said, he said something along the lines of like, what am I supposed to do? Let you murder all my friends, or something like that. And he shot Coral to death.
As he fucking should.
As he should. But the only reason, the absolute only reason that this case was ever opened, solved, whatever, was because Henley murdered Coral and had to call the police that night.
Jesus.
If that had not been the case, if Henley had not murdered Coral, if Thomas Curley had been the only person over there at Coral's residence, that would have been just another body.
Yep.
I would have still been talking. It would have still been a list.
Right.
So that's disturbing. That's disturbing and stressful in ways that, like, how can this is at least 28 bodies minimum, 28 bodies, 28
right.
people minimum went missing in this area, and nobody connected the dots to this Candyman.
Nobody did. Okay, I don't want to say nobody did anything because obviously the families did, but nobody in a position of power did anything real to help these families.
Oh yeah, no.
After body after body after body after bodies piling up.
Well, and that with the just I mean with the amount of missing kids, missing teens, um all from the Houston Heights area. It just the fact that nobody thought to look further. And then also, like, we kind of discussed the weird part about this case. They quit looking. They quit looking for more bodies. They didn't think that there were more bodies, and they quit looking. And they only looked in places that Henley and Brooks said to look, not knowing full well that Dean Coral had killed plenty of people by himself without the assistance of Brooks or Henley.
Right.
And they cut down the search as quickly as they could, because at this point in August of 1973, this is the biggest body toll from a murder in America ever.
At that point in time.
Right. In 1973, this is the biggest toll. And so it was said that the state officials kind of shut down the investigation because, as much as it was, over the limit that they had seen previously, at least it was only, so many bodies over that limit, and not 20 bodies over that limit or 40 bodies over that limit, or however many other victims Dean Coral might have had.
Right.
So they quit looking.
That's so
disturbing. Disturbing. Which, and this is the one area where I give cops a little bit of grace, in the way that, it wasn't the same time period. You didn't have Amber Alerts. You didn't have the, missing child and exploited website. You didn't have all of these other resources that you can kind of reach out to now.
Right.
in a case like this. But in a whole other regard, this is still the same section of the police office. Like, it's still the missing children's unit.
Right.
How many kids are missing? How many kids are not coming home? Why didn't you ever follow up on these runaway cases and see, hey, did your kid ever make it home?
They ever come back, or
You
are they
know,
still they
maybe
run
a
away?
year after being ran away with zero contact, you should worry. Like,
Yeah,
maybe you should
maybe
say,
do something about it. I don't know.
that's, yeah. Yeah. Well, and so there was even more with this case that I'm only going to go into like a tiny bit here, because it was such a rabbit hole, such a rabbit hole I went down for such a long time. But it was the fact that Dean Corll had mentioned to both of his associates that he belonged to this gay pedophile ring, or gay pornography ring. I'm so sorry. Gay pornography ring. He told both of his associates that he was a part of this ring. And weirdly enough, weirdly enough, in Dallas, Texas, not too far away from Houston, there was a man by the name of John David Norman actively working as this like massive pedophile. He had a huge ring out there that he was, basically setting up what he would call sponsors with fellows. And shortly after the death of Dean Corll, the police in Texas, in Dallas, raided John David Norman, and they found 50,000 to 100,000 note cards with the names of sponsors on them and like their preferences, and what they like, whatever. And these were
What?
names of people. These were names of famous people. These were names of doctors. These were names of lawyers. These were all kinds of people, all the way down to your blue collar, average, everyday worker.
That's crazy. 50 to 100,000?
Note cards.
Jesus Christ, dude.
Even weirder part, all of these note cards are handed over to the State Department. The State Department destroys the note cards, saying that these note cards have like no use like in a case involving fraud with a passport. Like, it was like some outlandish wild thing that had nothing to do with what this case, what even happened. They raided a pedophile and found all these note cards, and
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 all
they're
of these
talking
note
about a
cards have
passport
nothing to do
with fraud in
with.
a passport.
Right.
But what is fraud
No
in a
shit, they
passport?
don't have it. Like, no shit.
Like, what with the what? Uh, so that in itself was kind of weird. Also, there was I'm not 100% sure if it was John David Norman that these photos came from the raid of, but they did raid a different pedophile, and that pedophile did have, I think it was up to like 7 images of victims from Dean Corll. So Dean Corll's photos of his victims as he was
Somehow made
assaulting
it
them.
to this David Norman guy.
It might have been David Norman. It might have been a different pedophile. I'm not 100% sure. Because, like, in some cases, I read that it was like John David Norman's stock that he had. But in other cases, I've read where it was just like a pedophile that they found in general. They found like his stock, which apparently it was, photos from like a various amount of time, like from, decades worth of child pornography.
Right.
But they did find, like I said, victims of Corll's involved in that. So was this something that Dean Corll was involved in? Was this bigger than that? Well, and even weirder, I mean, there is not any information on John David Norman. There is little to no articles. The only articles about him are like his arrest records. And I mean, this guy apparently had no cards with people's names from, from famous
Not
people all the
even
way
just
down.
their names, but their preferences. In
Yeah.
children.
Yeah.
That's so
Well, and
wild
then
to me.
even weirder, John David Norman happened to be in Illinois when guess who was out and about working?
Gacy?
Gacy.
Gacy.
Mr. John Wayne Gacy. So they were both in Illinois at the same time. And then John David Norman has this right hand. It's like his guy that helps him with everything. Even when John David Norman and this guy, which his name is Penske, when Penske and Norman were locked up in Cook County Jail, they were still together producing their thing that they would send out in the mail to like set these arrangements up. They were still actively doing that through the gel newspaper. They were printing off their ads for their sponsors.
Printing off their own pedo newsletters
And
and the
then
jail newsletters.
even weirder, John Wayne Gacy, there was pay stubs from John Wayne Gacy's business made out to Penske, made out to John David Norman's right hand. So that is like unequivocal fact that Penske had been around Gacy, and the likelihood that Penske had been around Gacy and only worked for him and didn't get into the weird shit that they were both involved in is like little to none. Like let's be
Right.
real. Let's be real. Birds of a feather. You know?
Yeah.
So just weird. It's just weird in a lot of areas, and how the police in Houston handled the case all the way up to how the State Department handled those note cards. Um, yeah, yeah, and it just brings up a lot more questions for me. Like, I mean, I went down this rabbit hole for so long. Like, it was so many hours of just research and research and research. Um, and I mean, I was even looking in like where we're from, like our state, and looking at our state's missing and exploited children and seeing, and weirdly enough, I mean, there was one town that popped up like multiple times, like more times than the other towns, and like multiple times. And so I go Google this town because I'm just like, like what is it? Like, is this like a low income town? Like, is this what is this town that makes it so easy for these kids to be missing and exploited? And the first article is an article talking about how this town was like rated the safest town in America, or like number whatever on like the safest towns like kind of
Right.
list. And it's so weird. So weird. What do you mean it's the safest town? It's got all these kids missing, and then it's also like, how did the police in that area not connect those dots and say, hey, like this is a lot of missing kids. It's just stressful. It's
It
very
is very
stressful.
stressful. Absolutely.
But like I said, I mean, my main reason to talk about this case and to shine a light on this case is because they don't. They don't. Gacy was caught in 1978. He had just that few more bodies, and nobody else talked about the Houston mass murders anymore. And I mean, in Gacy's case and in this case with Dean Coral, it was both a ball drop for the police.
Absolutely. I hadn't heard anything about this case before we started talking about it. So the ball, seriously, they just dropped it so many times.
Yeah. Well, and that, I mean, that's what got me about this case initially. Is it's just it's so outlandish and so, like, you don't think that your friend, because I mean, in some of these cases, these were lifelong friends with Brooks and Henley. These were kids that they had known forever. Like, you don't think that, going with your friend over to smoke some pot with this older dude, who like seems all right because the kids all hung out with him. And you remember when he had the candy shop, right? And like we all hung out back there and nothing bad ever happened, right? And like you're trusting it and you're going with your friends, and you get murdered. You get murdered.
Murdered.
Yeah. Well, and that, I mean, must have been so hard even for the community to sort out, because it's like they're being taken by teenagers, and they're not being taken forcefully. They're not screaming and kicking. Like
Right.
they walked into this house. They were willing to go. But I mean, and that's like I said, I mean, with some of the parents being quoted as saying, like your kid doesn't leave wearing swim trunks and with only 80 cents in their pocket.
Right.
For a fact that that child didn't go missing. And those are the cases, those are the ones where I look at it and I'm just like, how did the police not take this seriously? In one of the cases, it was two boys and they were, stolen a half mile from their house, and
Right.
police
Do anything about
wouldn't
it.
budge on it, wouldn't take it. So I mean, I just think it's one of those cases to not bypass because of how ignored the families were and how much they had to do that work on their own. Um, and I think it's important to remember because it's commonly swept under the rug. And this story has so many victims. And I mean, on that list, I would include Brooks and I would include Henley because these are two boys that, even though they came from, like Brooks, the absent family, and Henley, the abusive one, they could have had options to become different people.
Absolutely.
But that interaction with Dean Coral,
That just kind of ruined it for them.
it ruined
For
their life.
sure.
Any option they had of being normal or being a regular person went out the window the moment they met Dean Coral. And that's another part of it too, is Dean Coral never spoke about these crimes. Dean Coral was not alive to take the blame, and he wasn't alive to answer for any sex rings that he was a part of or anything like that. So we are left here with puzzle pieces, and that's puzzle pieces that the police and the State Department would allow, you know.
Right.
So I like to bring it up. I like to, kind of shed that light on it, like I said, and really, bring it back to the families again, because these people, they waited so long. And that's kind of what brings me to our last and kind of final point here. There is still a victim who is unidentified. He is called John Houston Doe, 1973. They redid a sketch recently. You can see right there kind of the sketch of his face, a sketch of the clothes that he was wearing. um they said that he was found in Houston, obviously August 9th, 1973, right after the death of Dean Quarrell, in the shooting. They said that he had most likely been dead for a year around that time. So he probably died around August 1972 or went missing around August 1972. They said that he was white, possibly with Hispanic admixture. He had brown hair, approximately 7 inches in length. The word neolite was written on the heel of his boot, and he was approximately like 15 to 18 years old. And this is a body that is still sitting in the morgue currently. Um, Still no identification on that. And like I said, I mean, I want to bring kind of a focus to this and the fact that there are still families waiting, that never got an answer for Dean Coral. And especially, like I said, I mean, if we're not taking into account the damage that he could have done by himself, there's just so many more families that could be sitting there waiting and wondering. And some of those families, like I said, they might think, my kid ran away. And can you imagine the guilt and the hate that you live with for years, with that thought?
Yeah.
If I just, yeah, this is one of those cases that I feel like it's good to take some time for.
Hello.
But there is, if you go to the missing and exploited children's kind of website, you can kind of look up John Houston Doe if there's any information you have, or you think you might know who he is, or whose family might be. You can reach out there and they'll test away and kind of see if we can finally get some ID on the last victim there that they have. But that kind of brings us here to our conclusion. Do you have any thoughts, any questions?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. Information, and it's just very disappointing. And you are absolutely right. It is something that could have been avoided if anybody in the Houston Police Department had given it half a second more thought than they did.
Well, and I think that really goes back to the one mom who the Hillegeist, Miss Hillegeist, and her having that full like car description and his license plate, and they just never fucking looked. They just never fucking looked.
Drop the ball hardcore.
It's just like how I don't know how those officers, like especially after finding those bodies, could sleep with themselves knowing. Well, and that was one of the victims where it was a brother duo. Their dad actually worked across the street, was like working on a construction project across the street from where David or where Dean Coral lived at the time. And it that was one of the quotes that he said. He was like, he might have been torturing my sons while I was at work and I didn't even know. You
Right.
know,
Yeah. Which is such a sad thought to have.
and I mean guilt. Like he could have, and I was right next door.
Hmm.
He was doing those things and I was right next door. My kids were probably calling out for me, and
Right.
he's, you know, so yeah. Yeah, nothing's fucking innocent. If a guy is hanging out with your kids and wants to take them to the beach for a picnic or give them free candy to play with his pool table, um,
Don't let them do that.
don't do that. Don't do that. God, people are horrible. Um, and the world's so weird and so bad. And this is 1970. This is 1960. This is happening. This is 1970. This isn't even the world that we've created now, which is, what it is. Um, don't trust people.
I think that's all we have.
I think that's all for this time. Like Chloe said, we
Yes.
are gonna sign off with all that info. Hope that this didn't leave you too heavy.
Yes, we'll be back next time and it won't be
As a dog,
depressing.
yeah, macabre.
Yes.
But definitely keep an eye out for our upcoming kind of episodes on different topics that we're talking about. And
Thanks for coming to hang out.
we love you.
Bye.
Bye.